Hello, we are here today at the Taneytown History Museum. It's located at 340 East Baltimore Street in Taneytown. The date is September 15th, 2018. George Naylor is here with us today, and he's been an active volunteer here at the Taneytown History Museum for the last 14 years, and he is one of the original founders of our History Museum. My name is Peggy Keeney, and I'm also a volunteer here at the museum. George is now 92 years old, and he was born in 1926. And he's going to share with us today his memories of growing up on the farm, his early memories, starting around 1930. I think you have some memories of what it was like in your house growing up without electric. So tell us what that was like. What was it like in that farmhouse?
Well, I want to tell you about the farm I was born and raised on. It was located between Keysville in Carroll County and the Toms Creek Methodist Church in Frederick County. The Monocacy River separated Carroll County from Frederick County. Had I lived on this side of the Monocacy, I'd have gone to Taneytown schools in Carroll County, but I lived on the other side, which was in Frederick County, and went to Emmitsburg. I was born and raised on this farm. I would like to show you a picture of the farm that I'm going to be talking about. This farm was purchased by my grandfather in 1912, and he sold it to my father and my mom when they got married in 1924, when they took the farm over and my grandparents moved to Emmitsburg in retirement. This farm is still there today. I want to show you a picture of the farm. The house is still there today, and this wagon shed is still there, but the barn is no longer there. When my dad bought this farm in 24, he said that I want to make sure that we do better than just make a living. So he decided to ship milk. So he had to build a silo at the barn so we could put corn in for our cattle. And he built a milking parlor on the end of the barn. That was the beginning of our living on this farm in 24. That's 1924. I was born in 26. So I'm starting to think about the years of 30, 31 when I began to have to help do things around the house, being 4 and 5 years old. When you lived on a farm, you had to do things. You couldn't just play around. It was hard work. Everything was pick and shovel, manual work. We had no electric. We had no telephone. There were no wires in the house. There was no pipes in the house to freeze. So
You had to carry water, I guess.
we did, and I'll start off by telling you about the heat in this house. This was a nice house, but it was just a box. There was nothing in it, just walls and rooms. We had a cook stove. I'd like to tell you about the cook stove. It had a reservoir on one end where you would fill the reservoir with water. That was part of my job every evening when I became about 4 and 5 years old, was to fill this reservoir with water so it would be full for the next morning. Mother would have then warm water through this reservoir, which was heated by the firebox. There was an oven in the side that you would bake cakes in, and above the stove was a warming oven where you could set dishes in to keep things warm. Behind the stove was a wood box. I had to fill that wood box every late afternoon so that Mother wouldn't have to go get wood to use in the stove, or she wouldn't have to carry water in the reservoir. So that was the first jobs I had to do, was fill the reservoir with water and the wood box with wood. We had no water in the house. We had to pump our water by hand from a well. The well used to go dry, so Dad hooked up the roofs on the house and on the wash house and ran it through a reservoir that he built in the ground full of charcoal and gravel. And as the water went through that, then it would go into the well. From that time, we had no more dry wells.
Very good.
Water had to all be pumped by hand, carried in a bucket. It was always easier to carry 2 buckets than 1 because of the weight. And let me tell you a little bit about the wood. We didn't have coal in those days. We had wood. We had our own wood. Now, had we not had wood, we would have had to buy coal. But we had our own wood, and we saved money by cutting our own trees down with a saw with a handle on each end. Took 2 men to cut wood with a saw that went back and forth. We would cut a tree down, saw it in pieces 4 and 5 feet long, load them in a wagon pulled by 4 horses. We'd take them up to the back of the house and pile them up on a pile. When we got enough wood there to last us a year and a half, we would set up a saw and saw those 4 and 5 foot pieces into pieces 14, 15, and 16 inches long.
Okay.
Then we would throw them on a pile, and after we had everything sawed, then the next job was to split it by hand. And that would take a while, and we would, when we had enough wood to last for a year and a half, we wouldn't have to worry with any more wood for that year. That was the wood we used in our cook stove. If a piece of wood was too hard to split, we called it chunks. And those chunks we put into a chunk stove in our living room,
Okay.
which was the only way we had to heat our house during the winter. So we had a cook stove in the kitchen, which used split wood. We had a chunk stove in the living room, which burned chunks. Now, when we'd get up in the morning, Dad would throw some couple little pieces of paper in the fire chamber of the cook stove. He would put a couple of corn cobs in on top of the paper. Then he would throw a few pieces of scraps in on that and light it with a wood match. That's the way we started our fire every morning in the cook stove. That would heat our hot water that Mother would need and do the cooking. The chunk stove in the living room during the winter time, before we went to bed, Dad would fill the chunk stove with wood, shut the damper so that it just sat there and smoldered. It would have a little bit of heat in the living room during the night. The next morning, when he'd say, call everybody up, he would be the first one downstairs. Then he would open the draft in the pipe. The fire would flare up, and it wouldn't take long to have some heat. We'd all grab our clothes upstairs, come down and dress around the junk stove.
Where it was warm, yeah.
It was cold in our bedrooms. It would go down to about 24 and 25 at night. I would always take an iron to bed wrapped in a towel to warm my feet up so I could go to sleep. And those chamber buckets under the bed would freeze over at night.
Oh.
So
Okay.
nothing was easy. Everything was hard. And like I said, in the morning we'd grab our clothes, come downstairs, and dress around the chunk stove, which was in the living room. The water we carried, we had a wash house, which was attached to the main house with a sort of a breezeway. The breezeway had a roof over it and was attached to both the house and the wash house. Sides were open, so we could walk from our house into our wash house without getting wet when it was raining, but the sides were open. Our well was outside and we had to pump all our water. So if we were going to, every Monday was a wash day for my mother. We had to carry water in buckets, pump it, carry it in buckets into our wash house. We would put water in the wash machine. We would fill the 2 tubs in front of the wash machine for rinsing. And we would fill the 2 kettles hanging in the fireplace for warm water. On Monday morning when we'd get up, before we went to the barn, Dad would start the fire under the kettles in the washroom so that Mother would have warm water by 8:30, 9 o'clock when the time came to wash.
So what time did you get up and get all that started?
We'd get up about 4:30 in the morning. Every morning we'd get up at 4:30 because we'd be in the barn ready to milk by 5 o'clock. Remember I said, Dad said he wasn't going to, if he couldn't make any money at farming, he wasn't going to do it. So he said, we're going to do better than a living. So we went into the milk business. I'll cover that at a later date. But we'd get up at 4:30, start our fires, and in the wash house, we'd have to make sure our soap that we made with the lye formula was cut and enough for my mother to wash her clothes.
And can you tell us what the lye soap was made out of?
Well, a lot of lye was in it, and grease.
Lard?
Yeah. And we made our own soap. We didn't buy soap. And it was just a way of life.
Well, let's see. What else did you want to tell us here? You had a story you told us about what time you got up to do all this. And what about the breakfast? Tell about the breakfast that your mother cooked on the cook stove.
Okay, we always went to the barn and milked, did our work down there first. So we'd get up, we'd dress, we'd get our fires going, get the house ready for Mother. We'd head to the barn to do our work. That would take pushing 2 hours to do all our work down there. And by the time we came back, Mother would have breakfast ready. Now, breakfast in those days was ham and eggs and pond hoss, and pudding and sausage and fried potatoes because we went out to work. You know, we had to have good food and food that was going to last till noon.
You were pretty hungry when you came in milking too.
Exactly. When we come up for breakfast, we were hungry. And no such thing as coffee and donuts. A big luxury for me in those days was when we'd take our eggs to Emmitsburg on Saturday night to Fraley's grocery store in town. He did retail work and he did wholesale work. We'd take our eggs in there. If we had picked up walnuts, shell barks, anything like that, we'd take them into him in bags, and he would take them to Baltimore to the midnight market to sell. Everything we wanted to sell, he would haul into the midnight markets in Baltimore to sell. And this is how you lived in those days. You didn't waste anything. We had a lot of walnut trees. We had a lot of shellbark trees. We gathered that all up and sold it. And that was part of our living.
Did you sell the walnuts with the shells on, or did you?
On our, the green black walnuts, we had to run them through a corn sheller to take off the big green husk that every nut had on it. Mm-hmm. Then we would put them in bags and hang them over lines or lay them somewhere so they could dry. You had to dry your black walnuts before you could sell them. Shellbarks didn't fall off the tree until the frost hit them, and when they hit the ground, that husk that was on a shellbark would be open, and you could just with your fingers push it off and just put your shellbark in a bag. We used 100-pound bags to bag up our black walnuts and our shellbarks, and we'd haul them to Emmitsburg in our little old Model T truck in 100-pound bags.
Wow.
Most of them were pretty full when we take them in there. And
so you had nuts that you took and eggs. What other animals did you have on the farm that?
We raised a lot of chickens to 3 pound, a weight of 3 pound, because fryers, everybody wanted fryers that weighed around 3 pounds when they were dressed out. And that was another source of income for us. Dad would buy several hundred peepees every spring, and we would raise them to 3 pound dressed out weight, and we sold them live. We took them to Emmitsburg live, and he took them to Baltimore live. And we sold all kinds of peepees, from peepees to fryers in those days. We did a lot of that. We also made sure that when we butchered our hogs, that when we were finished curing our hams, they weighed 50 pounds a piece. A ham, 50 pounds a piece. That was a big ham. We got $1 a pound for a pound of hams in those days. That was big money. And the people in Emmitsburg, certain ones in Emmitsburg, the bankers and those kind of people, they just waited for him to butcher every year that they could buy a ham. And $1 a pound, 50 pound hams.
That was good.
A lot of money.
How about the milk? Did you sell milk there, or how did you sell your milk?
We sold our milk in cans. We milked about 25 cows. That was a lot of cows to milk by hand. And it would take us about 2 hours to milk 25 cows. And when we milked at night, we put our milk in 5 and 10 gallon milk cans. Then we would put those cans in a reservoir of cold water for a night, overnight. The morning milk, all we did was ran it down over a radiator. The radiator had cold water running through it. The water would run down over the outside of the radiator, and we'd catch it in 5 or 10 gallon cans. And it was fairly cool by that time. And the guy that hauled our milk, he'd be waiting for us every morning. We were first on his list to pick up milk. And that milk that he would pick up, he would gather up milk from other people that were in the dairy business, and he'd take it to a creamery.
And he
Where-
came every morning?
Every morning he came to every farmer that he picked up milk from, and that was his job, every morning to haul milk. And they were always in 5 to 10 gallon cans, milk was, that you sold. And that took 2 hours every morning, at least 2 hours every morning, and 2 hours every evening to do our milking. You had to be there. You couldn't be running around. And that's why a lot of people didn't want to be bothered with shipping milk, because you had to be home.
No vacations?
No vacations, no.
No going to the beach?
No. You worked, everything was pick and shovel in those days. Nothing was easy. Dad was a good blacksmith, because if something broke, you had to fix it. You just didn't go get a new part. You fixed it. And that meant heating it, straightening it, or else making it completely new, depended on the break. And he would always fix everything. Of course, a lot of farmers did that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
My dad wasn't the only one that was a blacksmith. Farmers had to fix their items that broke.
That's right, that's right. Well, I think we have a few more minutes. I think you have some other stories about Wash Day, like the Clothesline. Tell us about the Clothesline.
I'm going to be making up a little printout for the newsletter in the museum on the Clothesline.
Okay.
I think I'll hold off on that. There's a lot of secrets involved with clotheslines.
I know there were certain ways the
Well,
women did it. And
See, this told your neighbors what kind of people you were. Things on the clothesline.
very important.
How you did things on the clothes. A lot of secrets were let out on clotheslines.
Oh.
So I'll be writing about that later.
Oh, that'll be interesting. Very good, very good. That'll be interesting.
But as I said, my dad's first method of transportation was a horse and buggy. And there was 5 in our family, my mother and dad. I was the oldest of 3 kids, and I had 2 sisters. And there was just 5 of us, where the kids are all living, but our parents are passed. They're all deceased. But my 2 sisters are still living. And
Do you remember the family getting a car?
yeah, I remember our first car. It was like a box. The windshield was straight up and down. The back was straight up and down. It was just like a box sitting on 4 wheels with the motor in the front. Nothing fancy. If you raised the hood, you could see straight down to the ground. When you opened the door, there was just seats in there. And very plain, very plain. And I learned to drive on a Model T Ford when I started driving when I was about 10 or 11 years old on the farm.
Yeah.
And I had a grandfather that lived about 2 miles away, by the way the roads went, but we could see where he lived straight across from, it was only about 3/4 of a mile straight across where he lived. But it would take about 2 miles to go around, and Mother used to make supper for him every now and then, maybe once or twice a week. And the reason I always wanted to make supper, they'd let me take the supper over driving the Model T Ford.
Oh.
I had to go out on the road, but there was no cars on the road. And I just enjoyed driving a Model T Ford for the first time, like any kid would, you know.
Yeah. Oh.
Over there. And he had a little dog, little black dog. And he was a strange guy, hard of hearing. And he was a retired engineer. He was an engineer from out west. And he had a horned toad mounted. And I always wanted to see the horned toad. And he'd get it out for me. But he always had a piece of hard candy in his pocket. And he said, here's a piece of candy. The dog wouldn't eat this. You can have this. Boy, I couldn't wait till he gave me a piece of candy every
The
time.
dog wouldn't eat it,
Even though the dog wouldn't eat it, I couldn't wait till he gave it to me.
but you could have it.
A piece of hard candy. he lived by himself.
Huh.
And he was about, at that time, he was in his 80s when
Yeah.
I was delivering supper to him once in a while, you know. And I'll never forget that. But walked to the school bus. I had to walk about 3/4 of a mile to the school bus. And there was, at that site, there was a building. The people all built a little building for the kids to get in, wait for the bus to come. And that bus would come every day. And we'd go to Emmitsburg to school. But life on the farm was tough. It was hard. Everything was by hand. You can't imagine how hard it is to farm without electricity, without a phone. You had to do everything by hand. And including shipping milk, which meant milking cows. They had to be cleaned up, washed. Barns had to be cleaned out every morning. And that was tough for a kid. And by 1945, my dad's health got bad and my mom's health wasn't real good. And so he said, we're gonna get off this farm. We're gonna move to Taneytown. Now he said, would you like to take the farm over or would you like to try something else? He said, you've lived here now for 18 years. You know what farming is. Do you want to do it the rest of your life? And I said, I think I'll try something else. And to this day, now that was 1945, to this day I never regretted not taking the farm over. I'm glad that I tried something else.
Went a different route.
Yep.
Well, you have many wonderful stories, George, and it is hard in present day, hard for us to imagine having to carry water, no electric, and all the things that you mentioned, and what it was really like then. So you have painted a picture for us. We thank you very much for that.
Okay. I'll just make a few comments about my grandparents who bought the farm that I was born and raised on, and later my parents took the farm over. But my grandfather was a miller. He owned the mill down on Naylor's Mill Road, located between Keeney and Detour. And he bought that mill in 1907, and then he bought our farm in 1912, and he sold the mill to a family in 1916. So he owned the mill for 9 years, and he owned the farm for 12 years. And then of course he moved to Emmitsburg, where he retired, and they put him to work in there right away. They elected him mayor for 2 years. And then when Roosevelt started the WPA program to provide work for men, Emmitsburg was one of the first places that had their municipal sewage plant built by the federal government using men in that program. And they were looking for a supervisor, and they asked my grandfather to supervise the project. So that took a while, and he was supervisor for the Emmitsburg disposal plant back in those years. And then interestingly, both my grandparents died the same day.
Oh.
My grandfather, who was George C., and my grandmother Maud, died in 1960. Both of them on the same day.
Were they at home or?
They were at home, died at the house,
Oh my
and
goodness.
they were both ill, and both were in bed,
Huh.
and the family was all there, and they passed away the same day.
Oh my
And of course,
goodness.
we had a double funeral, and they were buried in the Keysville Cemetery.
Yeah. Okay, very good.